Thanks everyone for coming tonight. If you're interested in some coding kata problems of a different ilk, I'm a bit of a magic tragic. I play this game called Magic the Gathering, and I have some cards here tonight. If you'd like to come and grab a card off me after this talk, then get in touch with me over the Ruby AU Slack or LinkedIn or email. We'll pair on implementing this card in my Ruby project. We can pair for like an hour. So some of them are straightforward. We've got one here called Kobolds of Keep, which just has a name, a type, a power, and a toughness, and that's it. Other ones, you have words that are like this long, just for those at home. You have Kicker. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, each player sacrifices a creature. And some of the cards can be quite complex. So in that game, there are 22,000 cards. I have so far implemented 175, so there's a fertile ground for us to conquer together. Not here to talk about magic, just thought I'd share that off the back of Thomas's talk. I did come prepared thinking you were going to talk on katas. Today I'm going to talk about a production bug, 26 years in the making. Yes, I've changed the title. It was 17 years and then I did some math and no, it's actually 26 years. You know that time when you hear a song and you're like, no, that was only 10 years ago, and you work out, no, it was actually 25 years ago. It was like that. I'm Ryan, I work at Fat Zebra, which is a payments infrastructure company. We facilitate money going between merchants and customers back and forth. And in my day job there, I work as the team lead and as what I call a librarian or archaeologist role when it comes to Ruby and Rails trivia. In other words, I know where the bodies are buried and who put them there. I'm not going to tell you, but I will if you pay me. If my Ruby experience was a person this year, it would be old enough to drink and to vote. I've been doing this shit for a long time. I used to live in Melbourne, but now live out in Warrnambool, or as I like to call it, outer Western Melbourne. I'm just going to close the Zoom as a little meeting controls. I live in Warrnambool because houses are an affordable 6 figures, and the other thing that's a 6 in Warrnambool is the traffic. That is to say, there's only 6 cars on the road at any given time. Getting into Melbourne is either a 4-hour drive or a slightly longer train trip, and today I opted for the train. It's now $20 thanks to our dear leader, Dan. This train trip gives me some time for reflection because the internet is so shit on the train. And sometimes I like to think about if programming is more of a science or is it more of an art? And I can argue both sides of that fence. Science, because it's logic and it's data. What's more scientific than logic and data? Or art, because writing code in the best way is incredibly subjective. Think tabs versus spaces, line breaks or not, trailing commas at the ends of hashes, and that sort of thing. And today I came down on the side of science. I came down on the side of science because I was reflecting on the subject of this talk. In art, someone can utter the phrase, that's weird. And people either agree or they disagree, and everyone moves on with their lives. Art critics don't. They obsess about this, and I think they have better things to do with their time. Moving on. Science, on the other hand, when you hear, that's weird, there's 2 options. You can choose to look over and see what's weird, or if you've been in the science business long enough, you know there's a greater than 50% chance you should be legging it like hell out of the building before the full stop of that sentence is reached. You can always find out the reason for the utterance after the damage is done. That's enough of a prelude, I think. Let's get on with the actual talk. As a forewarning, this talk will involve time travel. Hope you've all taken your travel calm tablets. Let's get into it. We were doing a routine deployment of an application, and I got a message from a developer. He said, that's weird. Now, when I saw this message, I could have run away, but I didn't. I waited. I watched, and I'm still alive, thankfully. That dev sent me this message and attached a link to the logs of the application showing some error reports. As for some context, the pull request for this deployment had sat around for weeks and weeks being tested. It was a big one, and it survived an entire week on our sandbox environment with no issues. To be seeing issues right now after this deployment, this late in the process, is extremely unusual. One moment, sorry. On the page for exceptions, there's a graph that normally looks like this. And to be clear, we love it when it looks like this. But when that deploy happened, it looked like this. When the chart of errors starts looking at like Hokusai's great wave, you know you've got a serious problem on your hands. We started the rollback process immediately and then commenced our investigation. We had tested this. This app has thousands of automated tests in the test suite. It's consistently green. It gets the attention of the most senior developers at a company basically daily. How could something like this have slipped through? We didn't understand. So what was the cause here? And I'll give you one little hint. It was a method that is defined on hashes in Rails apps, but not Ruby, and it comes from active support. Okay, keep that in mind. Before we can get to that, we need to do our time travel. I need to cover a bit of history to provide that historical flavor. And so let's go back to 1989. Tim Berners-Lee and his friends decide that putting brackets around other words or even single letters to convey semantic meaning is a good idea. And they go on to invent an entire industry, which is widely considered a good invention. Conversely, in 1995, Java was released. The jury is still out on whether this was a good idea or not. But in the same year, Ruby was also released. Java and Ruby, two sides, same coin. In 1997, two nerds were flying from Zurich to Atlanta, not going from A to Z, but Z to A, on an 8-hour flight. They invent a unit testing framework for Java called JUnit. Their plane lands and their testing framework takes off, inspiring other projects like TestUnit, Minitest, RSpec, etc. Java code now has some automated tests. Using these tests to drive the writing of code became known as test-driven development. This is the year it was invented. Remember that name though, JUnit. It's going to become important later. Now, as an aside, here's what the latest and greatest laptop technology looked like at the time. It was an impressive 800 by 600 pixel screen, about this big, I swear, and a little mouse nub. And you'll notice from the picture that left and right click weren't invented yet. It was top and bottom click. If you're wondering what I was up to in 1997, I was going to primary school and attending birthday parties. I was only 10. Back to the talk. In 1998, the Java people also recognized that wrapping things in angle brackets to convey semantic meaning is such a good idea that they invent XML. But they don't stop there. They go a little overboard and invent SOAP as well. This is one of the SOAP Hello World examples I found. It's incredibly complex stuff, but as robust as a Nokia 3310, which by the way wasn't invented until the year 2000. As a bit of an aside, this is the real logo of XML. I kid you not. It's a real, honest to God logo. You go on the Wikipedia page, it's right there at the top. It's a very appropriate logo because if you use XML too long, you will be seeing stars. And I mention XML because it's important to the story as well. So I want you to remember those two things, JUnit and XML. They're critical to the story. Skip forward almost a decade, and Douglas Crawford invents a language called JSON. He forgets to support trailing commas on the ends of arrays and objects, thus confusing generations of programmers for all time. In the same year, an upstart programmer called David adds a feature to his pet project. His pet project is a web framework called Ruby on Rails and has just hit version 1.1. Go, David. What an awesome milestone. He adds a new helper method called hash from JSON. Just kidding. He doesn't do that. He adds hash from XML on hashes in Rails apps. Why? Because XML is still an in thing in the year 2006. You've got to understand the historical context. This is around the heyday of SOAP and XML RPC. Scaffolded controllers in Rails return XML as formatted data as one of the two defaults. Active Resource, a gem in Rails, consumes data from XML feeds. And so it makes sense to have something within the framework itself that will allow you to translate something from XML into something Ruby. And this is one of the methods. But now this is the year 2023, 17 years later. Surely we would have moved on as a society from XML to the glorious don't you dare put a trailing comma there utopia of JSON. But just like the pervasiveness of the internal combustion engine and vaping, XML still lives on. And so in 2023, that little function that DHH added in 2006 caused production issues. Was our production issue this guy's fault? No, I wish it was that easy. I do love throwing shade on DHH and what he has done or is currently doing, including his crooked views on diversity and inclusion, but I have better things to be doing with my time. He isn't to blame here, but he is to blame a lot for a lot. but he isn't to blame here, even as much as I wish he was. So this hash from XML method, it caused production issues in 2023. It was added in 2006, and in 2023, it caused issues. It's a method provided by active support, a core part of the Rails framework, and it failed in production, but no other environment. So now that's the full stop of the, that's weird. That's gone, that's in the distant past. Now the fallout has settled, and we're looking back through time to answer yet another scientific question. But why? Why did this happen? Why? It's not like this method from 2006 has no tests. It's extensively tested in Rails and across multiple versions of Ruby at that. Why did this extensive test suite in Rails not catch this bug sooner? Why did our extensive test suite not catch this bug? To find out why, we have to look at exactly what happened. I've been giving you a time-traveling history, a bit of flavor so far on this bug, and I've shown you the invocation that broke, but I haven't shown you the exception that happened. I've been withholding that from you. So let's have a look. This is the exception. What the fuck is RxML, I hear you ask? And what does it have to do with hash from XML? Hash from XML calls RxML code in order to pass XML into a Ruby-shaped object. Rails, for this feature, for reasons unknown, does not use Nokogiri, it uses RxML. The other thing that I haven't disclosed here is what actually changed during our deployment. What changed is that we went from using Ruby 2.7 to using Ruby 3.2. And we were doing this upgrade because Ruby 2.7 had reached its end of life for support and security fixes. In our minds, it was a completely necessary change, albeit a little later than we would have liked. It was a change to the underlying Ruby version that led to this exception, but only, and I stress, in production. There was a Rails issue filed about this. It says, hash from XML fails with load errors on Ruby 3. Well, that matches what we're doing. We're using Ruby 3. We're using hash from XML, and sure as shit, we're using Rails. Rails core team member Raphael answered, and he said, if your application depends on RxML, the fix is to add it to your gem file. You can also choose to use Nokogiri that's already a dependency of Rails as well. That's the end of his quote. What isn't pointed out here is that RxML is chosen already as the default processing backend for hash from XML, and that Nokogiri isn't. It's been that way since 2006, despite Nokogiri's prominence in every Rails application. It's strange. So there's clearly a smoking gun here. Ruby 3, Rails, and this hash from XML method. This combination breaks things. But hang on, Rails itself was tested on Ruby 3. Well, why didn't it fail in that, at least on their CI under Ruby 3? The reason for that is because Rails already specifies RxML in its own gem file. It's not an optional dependency, so it's always available every single time the test runs. So why didn't it fail in our app? We don't use RxML. We're modern day developers. We use Nokogiri, like sensible people. Our application in our gem file does not specify RxML, and so it should have failed in development or test at least. Why didn't it? Why didn't it fail in any of those lower environments? To investigate further, we found out that RxML and a bunch of other standard library packages were moved out of the Ruby standard library out into their own specific gems. We didn't realize at the time that we had a dependency on one of those gems, the RxML gem. So what, though, was causing our development and test branches to work? Something must have been bringing in that RxML gem as a sub-dependency. To track down why this might have been the case, I looked through not our gem file, but our gemfile.log. And sure enough, there was a gem that did have a dependency on RxML. Can you guess what it is? It's one you've probably heard of and you use, but it's not Rails, it's not RSpec. What's that? Nope, not Minitest. Who said RuboCop? God staff you, it is RuboCop. Indeed, of all things, RuboCop has a dependency on RxML. So when we install RuboCop, as we do in development and test environments to run our tests and to check our code, we're also installing RxML. When we build our production gem dependencies, we exclude development and test dependencies. We don't need them at that point in time. That exclusion includes RuboCop and by extension, RxML. No RxML, no hash from XML, and production ends up breaking. But why? Again, why? Keep going all down the whys. Why on earth does RuboCop depend on RexML? What does RuboCop, the most pedantic code style library in the world, have to do with XML? To find out when RuboCop added its dependency on RexML, I did some more archaeology and came across this GitHub issue from 2020. Do you want to know its title? Add JUnit formatter. Yeah, RuboCop allows you to format its output so that it is JUnit compatible. This is so it's compatible with CI services like Jenkins. But what does JUnit formatter look like? Well, let's take a look. JUnit's expected format is XML. And RuboCop uses RexML to generate the XML output so that it doesn't have a dependency on Nakagiri. JUnit, that's the testing framework that was invented in 1997. It's traveled through time to thoroughly kick us in the pants. If you've ever wanted RuboCop to tell you that there's an extra blank line in a file in the most obtuse data format known to humanity, well, as of 2020, you can do this if you specify the JUnit option to the formatter when running RuboCop. It's a standard built-in RuboCop feature. So that is how two well-intentioned developers on a flight from Zurich to Atlanta in 1997, by ways of many, many layers of indirection, broke our production build in 2023. Now we've answered the why. The final scientific question we need to ask is, how on earth could we stop this happening again? We had an issue in production, and when those happen, we need to be retrospective. Couple of things. In order to prevent this issue from occurring in the first place, we could have read the changelog or skimmed all 5,000 plus commits between the Ruby versions we were using and the one we're now using. But we didn't do that because we're developers with deadlines. We don't have time to do that. We did this upgrade. We upgraded Ruby from 2.7 to 3.2, and yeah, things broke automatically. A major Ruby version upgrade is going to do that. We fixed those tests. We ran others. We did so much manual testing on this. Every single signal that we got, once this work was done, was green. It was all good according to our tests. Every single thing worked until it got to production. We could have also bundled up our code and then ran a search over that to see if any of that code in the directory even referred to RexML or one of the other deprecated standard library packages. But even then, would we have caught it? Would we have had enough of an eagle eye to notice that one of Active Support's 6 XML mini backends, not 1, not 2, not 3, but 6, it supports 6 different backends. Would we have had enough of an eagle eye to notice that one of those backends, the one that just so happens to be the default, depends on a gem that has been moved out of the standard library? And would we have noticed that we were using this particular part of Active Support in this particular application? A lot of things have to occur all in order for us to have noticed. And I don't think we would have done that, regardless of how much time we had. But perhaps it's a trick we could use later on in these situations. Another thing that we could have that could have solved it is if RAC took the NPM approach and bundled each teeny tiny function off into its own little package or gem. To opt into using a particular active support function, you could add the gem to the project. To really give it that proper NPM flavor, every 20th version could be co-opted by Russian hackers who install crypto miners on all your machines through nefarious subdependencies. But in summary, in retrospective summary, I think this bug was mostly unavoidable. The upgrade to Ruby was of critical importance due to the ending of life of 2.7. All our testing, all our signals indicated that things were good, and we had no reason at all to suspect otherwise. I wouldn't blame anyone, including DHH, or any one thing in particular, in all complete honesty. A confluence of events spanning nearly 3 whole decades caused this production issue. Since then, we have instituted a few measures to ensure that this particular feature is even more robustly tested. And yeah, that doesn't mean we're testing in production. Once bitten, twice shy. I think what we did right was recognizing when that wave was coming for us. And we did that with a great monitoring and alerting setup. And if there's anything I want you to take away from this talk, it's not how bad XML's logo is, despite its tragicness. It's not how thoroughly crooked DHH's political views are, even though they are. I think that as developers, we underestimate the real power of a good monitoring and alerting setup. And in this case, having one saved our bacon. We were alerted to this problem in a handful of minutes of it happening. A developer got enough of a signal from that to speak to that scientific utterance. That's weird. And then they knew to do a rollback, all in the space of less than 5 minutes. I would encourage you all to spend some time looking at your own monitoring tools in production and seeing what you could do to improve them this week. Are there noisy alerts you could turn off? Logs that could be tuned to give better, finer grain detail? Take a look and see what you can do to make maintaining your applications that little bit easier. A good monitoring system means that I can go for early walks on the beach back in Warrnambool without having to worry about anything being on fire when I come back home and sit down at my desk. A good monitoring system means that I will know about it while on the beach. That's all I have for you tonight. Thanks for having me come. Open the floor to questions. What do you have? Adam. We run it on CI. So when we run bundle install, we run it with development and test dependencies. So we have RuboCop and Brakeman and a couple other stuff as well. That's how it ends up in the test bundle. That's right. Yeah. Yep. And that should stop developers from deploying, anything with a blank line in it or a Brakeman security vulnerability, which is way more severe. Yeah. Yes.
I'm curious, this might be a new question, but why on your staging, so when you run it in production, right? Wouldn't that have just your production checks, and then you would have found checks?
I left that bit off.
Yes.
I did. That endpoint requires us to, I'm not sure how much I can disclose. It talks to an external API. We do not have the correct setup in staging to properly exercise it. We did not have the proper, yep. So we stubbed out a bunch of the interaction through like VCR stubs and that sort of thing. And we thought that that was working. We had data in production metrics that were saying it was working before the deploy. No reason to suspect this change would have caused that issue. Yeah, but yes, yes, and we fixed that now. Yeah, Kevin.
Michael asked you, would RuboCop require false have made this work okay?
Would RuboCop require false have made this work okay? Depends on how bundler interprets that instruction. So Michael's saying there, if you go into your gem file, you say gem RuboCop and require false, it won't require RuboCop. But I don't know about the sub dependencies. I think it might still do that, or I'd need to play around with it. I'm 50-50 on that, but great question. Anyone else? And thank you again. And if you want to, come grab a card as well.